What happens when you hire a fake girlfriend and the fake part disappears? This isn't your typical arranged romance. It's a deep dive into an unexpected obsession, a line blurred between pretense and profound reality. Get ready to question everything you thought you knew about love and control. The wedding invitation sat on the marble counter like a blade pressed against my skin, gold-trimmed, embossed with Rosetta's name entwined with another man's. Vincent. The letters gleamed as though they knew they were mocking me. I should have thrown it in the trash, or better yet, into the fire, but I couldn't. My fingers lingered on the heavy cardstock, tracing the edges as if doing so might reopen every scar I'd tried to bury. My ex-fiancé was marrying someone else, not just anyone. A man with old money, a family name dripping in legacy, and a reputation polished like sterling silver. The press had already decided their love story was the union of the century. The photos splashed across every glossy page, Rosetta smiling in gowns that cost more than most people's rent. She looked radiant, untouchable. And me? Zayden Sterling, the man who once had her heart, reduced to nothing more than a headline waiting to be written. Billionaire shows up alone while former flame marries into aristocracy. The thought alone made my jaw tighten. I could already hear the whispers at the wedding, the laughter hidden behind champagne flutes. I'd built empires on Wall Street, crushed rivals, and expanded my empire across continents, yet I couldn't stomach the idea of walking into that ballroom with nothing but a shadow at my side. The city lights bled through the penthouse windows, spilling across the polished wood floors. My reflection in the glass looked as cold as I felt, chiseled features, perfectly tailored suit even at home, eyes dark with something I didn't want to name. Loneliness. I lifted a glass of bourbon and downed it in one swallow. The warmth did nothing. Closure, I told myself. That's what I needed. A final act of defiance. To show her, to show everyone, that I was not the broken man they all imagined. But showing up alone? That would be handing her the victory she wanted. My phone buzzed on the counter, breaking the silence. Ellen's name flashed on the screen. My oldest friend, though she'd long ago traded business suits for academia. I almost let it go to voicemail, but something in me needed a voice that wasn't just my own. "You sound like hell," she said the moment I answered. "Good evening to you, too." My voice was dry, brittle. Don't even try to play it off. I know that tone. The wedding got to you, didn't it? Silence stretched between us. My only answer, the low hum of the city outside. "Zayden, you can't go to that circus alone," she pressed. "Rosetta's counting on it. She'll stand there on Vincent's arm, glowing for the cameras, while you stand in the shadows. Don't give her that satisfaction." "I won't." The words were out before I even thought them through. "Oh? And who are you bringing?" That was the question. My chest tightened because I had no answer. No one fit the role. Not in this city. Not in my carefully curated circle. They were all socialites, business partners, people with their own agendas. None of them could stand at my side and silence the storm. I hung up with Ellen after the usual exchange of stubborn words. The bourbon glass was empty again, and still, my mind churned. That was when I thought of her. Vivian Karl. I'd seen her once, weeks ago, at a small art auction tucked in a corner of downtown. She'd stood there with a clipboard clutched to her chest, explaining some piece of modern nonsense to a half-interested buyer. But it wasn't the art that caught me. It was her voice, steady, rich, full of conviction even as her hands trembled. Fire lived in her, quiet but undeniable. I hadn't spoken to her then. I'd been a shadow in the crowd, watching. But the memory of her eyes, hazel flecked with gold, sharp and unyielding, refused to leave me. Could she? The thought was ridiculous. She wasn't from my world. She probably didn't even own a gown worthy of stepping foot in that ballroom. But maybe that was exactly why she might work. No pretense, no agenda, just someone real. I leaned against the counter, the idea sharpening like steel in my mind. Hire her. One night. Nothing more. She'd play the role, silence the whispers, and then vanish back to her world. A dangerous idea. But I'd made fortunes on dangerous ideas. My hand tightened around the phone again. I could find her. It would take one call, maybe two. Money spoke louder than anything in this city. Still, a part of me hesitated. What kind of man was I, reduced to hiring a stranger to play the woman at my side? The kind who couldn't bear to lose. The bourbon burned on its way down again, but this time it steadied me. I would not walk into Rosetta's wedding alone. The following night, I found myself in front of a narrow gallery tucked between two looming towers. The air smelled faintly of paint and desperation. Inside, Vivian stood behind a counter stacked with unpaid bills disguised as brochures. She wore a plain blouse, her hair tied up, yet she carried herself with a strength I couldn't look away from. Her eyes snapped up when the bell above the door chimed. Surprise flickered, then suspicion. Her eyes snapped up when the bell above the door chimed. Surprise flickered, then suspicion, as Vivian Karl recognized the figure who stepped into her gallery. Zayden Sterling did not belong here, among peeling paint and half-lit canvases. He was tailored sharp lines and cool arrogance, the sort of man whose shoes alone could pay her overdue electricity bill. His presence sucked the air out of the room. Vivian's fingers curled tighter around the clipboard she'd been holding. "Can I help you?" she asked, her voice wary, edged with the kind of defiance only exhaustion could sharpen. Zayden studied her without answering right away, taking in the way she stood, shoulders squared though weariness clung to her eyes, chin lifted as if daring him to find fault. This was the woman he remembered from the auction, trembling hands but unshaken voice, a spark no amount of poverty could dim. And in that spark, he saw the possibility of what he needed. For Zayden, the stakes were simple yet suffocating. Pride had chained him his entire life, pulling him upward and outward, making him stronger, richer, harder. Yet beneath the steel facade was the terror of being seen as weak. He could not walk into Rosetta's wedding and hand her victory. He could not give his rivals a headline that spelled his downfall. One night with Vivian Karl might be the shield he required. But one night with her also carried the risk of shattering the careful mask he wore. "I think you can," Zayden finally said. His voice was low, deliberate, the kind of voice that usually closed deals before the papers were signed. Vivian narrowed her eyes. "I don't sell paintings to men like you." That startled him. Men like him. A smirk tugged at his lips. "You don't even know what I'm here for." "I know enough," she shot back. "People like you don't stumble into places like this unless you're looking for something you can't buy." Her words hung in the air, uncomfortably close to the truth. "On the contrary," he said softly, "I intend to buy exactly what I need." Her brows furrowed, but before she could speak, the phone behind her began to ring. She ignored it. Her gaze stayed fixed on him, trying to read what game he was playing. "I need someone to accompany me," Zayden continued, his tone clipped. "A wedding, public. Everyone who matters will be there." For a moment, silence stretched. Vivian's mouth fell open slightly, then snapped shut. "You're joking." "I never joke about business." Vivian let out a breath, disbelief flashing across her face. "Business? That's what this is to you?" Zayden's expression did not falter. "Everything is business." The clipboard slipped from her fingers onto the counter with a soft thud. She crossed her arms. "Why me?" "Because you're unforgettable." The thought coiled in Zayden's chest, but he answered differently. "Because you're not from my world, which means no one will see you coming, and that is exactly the effect I require." Her laugh was hollow. "You want me to play your girlfriend?" "Yes." She blinked, stunned by his bluntness. She was drowning in debts, scraping to keep the gallery alive, and here stood a man offering money for something as ridiculous as pretending to be his partner. Her stomach twisted. Zayden sensed her hesitation. One night. I'll make it worth your while. Worth her while. Those words echoed like temptation. Vivian thought of the overdue bills hidden beneath the brochures on her desk, of the landlord's thinly veiled threats, of the artists she promised she'd fight for even as the walls of the gallery closed in. She needed money. She needed rescue, though she hated the word. But she also needed more than that. She needed proof. Proof she wasn't invisible. Proof she belonged in rooms where women like Rosetta floated effortlessly. Rosetta. Her name alone filled the air. Vivian had seen her face, flawless and smug, across every glossy magazine at the corner store. She was beauty packaged and perfected, a woman the world bent toward. Beside Vincent, she looked like royalty reborn. Vivian couldn't imagine herself in that orbit without being chewed apart. Her chest tightened. The risk was humiliation. Public, brutal, permanent. Zayden's gaze never wavered. "You want the money?" he said, his voice a quiet challenge. She hated that he was right. Later that night, Vivian sat at her tiny kitchen table with Corinna on the other end of the phone line. The apartment smelled faintly of old coffee and paint thinner. "You're considering this?" Corinna's voice was incredulous, sharp with worry. "Vivian, it's suicide. Do you know what those people will do to you? You'll be the headline for all the wrong reasons." Vivian pressed her forehead against her palm. He offered enough to clear the gallery's debts, maybe even enough to keep it alive for a year. Alive for a year isn't worth destroying yourself for a night. Vivian's eyes burned. "You don't get it. I can't keep patching holes forever. This place, it's all I have, Corinna. And if I don't do something drastic, it's gone." Her friend's sigh crackled through the line. "Then you'll build again. You'll survive. You always do." Vivian's throat tightened. "I'm tired of surviving. I want to matter." Silence answered her, thick with the weight of truth. In the penthouse across the city, Zayden poured himself another bourbon, though the glass stayed untouched. He stared at a magazine cover discarded on the table, Rosetta draped in pearls, her smile dazzling, Vincent's hand resting smugly at her waist. Rage clawed at him, but beneath it pulsed something weaker, something he despised. Fear. Fear of standing in that ballroom with the world watching him bleed. He could not allow it. Pride was his compass, but pride was also his prison. If Vivian refused, he would find someone else. He had to. But his instincts told him she was the one who could shift the story, who could tilt the spotlight away from Rosetta. Theirs was a gamble with no safety net. For Vivian, the stakes were her dignity, her place in a world that would happily laugh her back into obscurity. For Zayden, the stakes were his pride, his empire, the fragile illusion that he was untouchable. As the night deepened, both of them lay awake in their separate corners of the city, imagining the same ballroom lit with chandeliers, the same sea of eyes, the same whispers ready to cut. Neither knew just how close their paths were to colliding or how dangerous it would be when they did. If you were Vivian, would you risk humiliation for a chance to save everything you've built, or walk away and let it all crumble? The gallery had smelled of dust and desperation, yet Zayden Sterling had walked away with something more dangerous than any art piece, an idea that refused to let him go. Days passed, and still, he could not erase Vivian Karl from his mind. The way she had stared him down, unflinching in the face of his wealth and power, had unsettled him. He told himself it was logic, that her very lack of polish made her valuable to him. Yet in the quiet hours, with the city sprawling beneath his penthouse windows, he knew it was something else, something he did not want to name. The invitation to Rosetta's wedding sat like a stone in his office drawer, its gold trim mocking him. He had to act. And so, when he heard of a small charity auction tucked in a forgotten corner of the city, he went. Not because the art interested him, his walls were already crowded with priceless canvases, but because he had heard she would be there. Vivian Karl. The auction hall was nothing compared to the grand ballrooms he was used to. The lights buzzed overhead, the crowd scattered with faces more earnest than polished. Yet in the center, standing before a painting too bold for its own good, Vivian commanded the room. Her voice carried, sharp with conviction. Art isn't about what's fashionable. It's about truth. And truth doesn't fade when the trend does. If we don't protect these voices now, they'll be gone forever. Applause rippled through the hall, small but sincere. Her hands trembled slightly as she lowered the microphone, but her eyes burned. Zayden, watching from the shadows, felt something twist in his chest. This was no act. She believed every word, and that belief set her apart from the hollow masks he lived among. He waited until the crowd thinned, until she slipped to the back with a clipboard and a sigh that carried the weight of exhaustion. That was when he approached. "You speak as if the world might actually listen," Zayden said, his voice smooth but edged. Vivian spun, eyes narrowing when she saw him. "You again. You remember me. How could I forget? You walked into my gallery like a wolf in a henhouse." He allowed himself a faint smile. "And yet, you didn't run." Her chin lifted. "Why are you here?" "To give you a proposition." Vivian barked a short laugh, though there was no humor in it. "Of course, men like you always have propositions. This one benefits us both." He stepped closer, lowering his voice. "I need someone. One night, at a wedding." Her eyes widened, then narrowed again. "The same nonsense you tried to pitch me before?" "Not nonsense," he said evenly. "A contract. You stand beside me. You play the role of someone who has my attention. In return, I ensure every bill on your desk disappears." The words hit her like a blow. He had seen through her mask too easily. Vivian turned away, gripping her clipboard as if it might steady her. "You think you can buy anyone," she whispered. "I don't need anyone," Zayden corrected. "I need you." Silence settled, broken only by the hum of the flickering lights. Vivian's heart pounded in her chest. The offer dangled like salvation, yet it reeked of danger. To step into his world would be to step into fire. Every magazine cover of Rosetta's smug smile flashed before her eyes, every whisper she'd overheard about women who thought they belonged and were torn apart. "I would be eaten alive," she said, voice trembling despite herself. "Not with me beside you." She spun back to him, anger flaring. "And what if you're the one who devours me?" For a moment, Zayden said nothing. His gaze locked onto hers, unflinching. Then, softer than she expected, he said, "I don't want to break you, Vivian. I want the world to see what I saw tonight. A woman who doesn't flinch." Her throat tightened. No one had ever spoken of her like that. Not Corinna, not her artist, not even herself. Zayden stepped closer, invading the fragile space between them. He reached out, not to pull, not to claim, but to brush his fingers lightly against the back of her hand where it rested on the clipboard. The contact was fleeting, casual in appearance, but it seared through her like fire. Her breath caught. His eyes softened, just for a moment, and in that brief exchange, the room tilted. This wasn't business anymore. This was something raw, unspoken, and real. Vivian snatched her hand back, clutching it to her chest as though burned. "You're insane." "Perhaps." His smile was faint, but his eyes were deadly serious. "But you'll accept, because you want more than survival." Her lips parted, a protest on the edge of forming, but no words came. He had seen too much, too quickly. Later, back in her apartment, Vivian sat at the kitchen table with Corinna again, the offer replaying in her mind. "He's dangerous," Corinna insisted through the phone, her voice tight. "This isn't just a man asking for a date. This is Zayden Sterling. His life is a battlefield. If you walk into it, you won't come out the same." Vivian's fingers toyed with the edge of an unpaid bill. "He offered enough to save the gallery." Corinna groaned. "At what cost, Viv? Your pride? Your heart? Vivian's eyes dropped to the bills stacked like accusations. Maybe both, but at least I'd still have something to fight for. Corinna was silent for a long time. Then, softly, she said, "If you do this, promise me one thing. Promise me you won't lose yourself trying to play someone else." Vivian's throat tightened. I don't know who else to be. Across the city, Zayden stood at his penthouse window, bourbon untouched in his hand. The skyline glittered, but his reflection was all he saw, sharp, cold, untouchable. Yet the memory of her hand beneath his lingered, softening edges. He had long since hardened. The contract was not yet signed, but the decision had already been made. Vivian Karl would walk beside him into that ballroom, and nothing, no headline, no rival, not even Rosetta herself, would outshine the spark that had just been lit. The days leading up to the wedding blurred together, a storm of silk, diamonds, and sharpened nerves. Vivian had never imagined her life would twist this way, that she, who once counted every dollar before daring to buy a new tube of paint, would now be standing before racks of designer gowns in a private suite overlooking the city. The floor-length mirrors reflected her back at her with almost mocking disbelief. Zayden stood a short distance away, arms folded, his expression unreadable but his eyes sharp, scanning her every reaction. He had summoned tailors, stylists, and a woman named Morel, who spoke with the clipped authority of someone who had dressed royalty. They flitted around Vivian like hawks, tugging fabric this way and that, whispering about cuts and silhouettes as though she were clay to be molded. Vivian's jaw tightened. "You're not remaking me," she said firmly, startling Morel into dropping a pin. Zayden's gaze flickered toward her, a glimmer of approval in his dark eyes. "No one is remaking you, but you will walk into that ballroom armed. The gown is your armor. The rest, your fire, must stay." She turned toward him, half expecting sarcasm. But his voice was steady, sincere. For a man who dealt in facades, he seemed oddly determined to protect her truth. By the time the final gown was chosen, a deep emerald silk that hugged her frame like it had been spun for her alone, Vivian hardly recognized the reflection staring back. She looked powerful, radiant, like a woman who belonged in the world she had always been locked out of. But her eyes, hazel flecked with defiance, remained the same. "Perfect," Zayden murmured, and something unspoken passed between them, a current that made the air crackle. The wedding was held at a cathedral carved into the very bones of the city, where chandeliers spilled gold light onto marble floors and every guest looked as though they had stepped from the cover of a glossy magazine. Black cars lined the street outside, paparazzi swarming in frenzied waves, shouting names, capturing every glint of diamond, every tailored cufflink. And then came Zayden Sterling. The crowd surged as he stepped out, the flash of cameras burning like fire. But it wasn't only him, it was the woman on his arm. Vivian, in emerald silk, her chin lifted, her stride unyielding. She didn't flinch at the shouts, at the popping bulbs. She walked as if she had always belonged there, though her heart beat like thunder against her ribs. Whispers rippled instantly, a current threading through the crowd. Who is she? Not one of ours. She's stunning. Where did Sterling find her? Inside, the cathedral swelled with murmurs as heads turned. Rosetta, at the far end of the aisle, caught sight of them as the ceremony prepared to begin. Her painted smile faltered just slightly before she smoothed it again. But her eyes, those perfect eyes that once studied Zayden like a prize, flashed with something dark. Vivian felt the weight of that stare, sharp as glass. She steadied herself, clutching Zayden's arm more tightly than she meant to. He leaned down, his voice a murmur meant only for her. "Breathe. They're looking at you because they can't look away." Her lips parted, and she almost laughed at the audacity of it. But the truth was there. Rosetta's jealousy burned like a torch. and Vivian had lit it without even trying. The reception sprawled into a palace-like hall, chandeliers dripping crystal, tables drowning in orchids and silver. Waiters swept by with champagne flutes, while an orchestra hummed softly in the background, and everywhere whispers followed Vivian like shadows. Who is she? Not from any of the old families? Look at the way she laughs. It's not rehearsed. Zayden felt it. Every eye that landed on Vivian was a victory. She wasn't polished, she wasn't playing their game, and yet she eclipsed them all. Pride swelled in him, pride not just in winning the spectacle, but in her. But victory was never unchallenged. Vincent, the groom himself, found his way across the polished floor to where Zayden and Vivian stood. He wore his charm like a weapon, his smile the kind that cut rather than soothed. "Sterling," Vincent said, lifting his glass in mock salute. "I didn't think you'd come. Alone, that is." His eyes flicked to Vivian, lingering with thinly veiled disdain. "But I see you've found company." Vivian's spine straightened. She could feel the trap. Vincent wanted to belittle her, to reduce her to an ornament, a pawn. Zayden opened his mouth, but Vivian was faster. She tilted her head, her smile sharp. "Company? Oh, I suppose I am. Though from what I've seen tonight, your bride might say the same." Vincent's smile froze. A ripple of suppressed laughter from a passing guest pricked the air. Rosetta's hand tightened on her champagne glass across the room, eyes narrowing. Zayden's lips curved, the faintest flicker of amusement and pride breaking his icy composure. Vivian had struck cleanly, and she hadn't flinched. Vincent cleared his throat, feigning nonchalance. "Sharp tongue. Careful, miss." "Karl," she supplied before he could finish, her gaze unwavering. "Vivian Karl." Zayden placed his hand lightly over hers, his touch steadying but also grounding himself. The spark of warmth between them flared again, a reminder of the dangerous current they both tried to ignore. Vincent gave a stiff nod and excused himself, but his retreat was a victory. Vivian had disarmed him with wit sharper than any blade. As the night unfurled, the tension tightened. Rosetta circled like a predator in silk, her eyes locked on Vivian whenever she thought no one was watching. Guests leaned in, whispering not about the bride, but about Zayden Sterling's mysterious partner. At the center of it all, Zayden felt something he hadn't expected. Pride, yes, but beneath it, deeper, was a pull he couldn't explain. Vivian wasn't playing the role he'd given her. She wasn't simply a hired shield. She was luminous, unpredictable, real. When she laughed, truly laughed at something Corinna had once told her and repeated nervously to fill a silence, the sound cracked through the hall, unpolished and warm. Heads turned, smiles softened, and for a moment, she owned the room. Zayden's chest tightened. He had meant this arrangement to be armor, a facade to protect him from humiliation. Instead, he found himself stripped of his own defenses, his gaze fixed on a woman who had walked into fire and managed to make it bend around her. He leaned closer as she sipped her champagne, her fingers brushing the stem of the glass. His voice was low, meant for her alone. "Do you know what you've done tonight?" Vivian blinked at him. "Made a fool of myself?" "No," he said, his eyes locking with hers. "You've made them forget her." Her breath caught. The orchestra swelled, laughter rippled in the distance, but all she felt was the weight of his gaze, the sincerity in his words. Rosetta, watching from across the hall, saw it too. And in that moment, the woman who once believed herself untouchable realized she had lost something she could never reclaim. The reception hall had thinned slightly as the night wore on, but the air remained thick with champagne bubbles and watchful eyes. Guests lingered in corners, their laughter pitched higher than usual as gossip bloomed in the wake of Rosetta's radiant ceremony. Everywhere Vivian moved, she felt the whispers trailing her like silk ribbons, some admiring, some scathing, all charged with curiosity. And in the center of it all, she kept her hand resting lightly on Zayden's arm, as though she had always belonged there. But belonging, Vivian reminded herself, was the greatest illusion of all. She excused herself for a moment, needing air, and wandered near the marble corridors lined with gold-framed mirrors. That was when she saw them, Rosetta and Zayden, standing just out of sight from the main hall. She paused, half hidden by a towering floral arrangement, her heart hammering even before the first words cut the air. "You shouldn't have come," Rosetta hissed, her perfect smile nowhere to be seen now. "Not with her." Zayden's voice was calm, but it thrummed with steel. "You invited me, Rosetta. Don't act surprised that I accepted." Her laugh was sharp, bitter. "I invited you because I wanted to see you small, alone, broken, and yet you show up with that girl. Who is she, Zayden? A distraction? A shield? She's none of your concern." "Oh, but she is," Rosetta snapped, stepping closer, her jeweled hand pressing flat against his chest as though she could push the heartbeat from him. "You think I don't see it? The way they whisper about her? The way she outshines me without even trying?" Vivian's stomach flipped, her throat going dry. Rosetta feared her? She, a struggling gallery owner with debts drowning her, was enough to shake the woman who once ruled Zayden's heart? Rosetta's voice dropped lower, venomous. "I didn't marry Vincent for love. Do you know what love ever gave me? Nothing. But power. His family name, his influence. Those will last. What I want now is simpler. I want you to know you lost me. I want to see you miserable, Zayden. I want to see you bleed." Zayden's silence stretched heavy before his voice cut through. "Then you'll be disappointed, because for the first time in years, I don't feel like the one who lost." Vivian's breath caught. Heat rushed to her cheeks, her body torn between stepping out, revealing herself or fleeing before they saw the truth in her eyes. Rosetta's lips curled. "You can pretend, Sterling, but I know you. I know the pride that eats you alive, and she—" Her voice turned cruel. "She will never be me." And then she was gone, her perfume lingering in the corridor like poison. Vivian pressed back against the cold marble, her pulse hammering. She hadn't meant to hear. She hadn't wanted to. But every word wrapped around her ribs like thorns. She was more than a pawn. Rosetta saw her as a threat. And Zayden, what did he see? When she stepped back into the hall, Zayden was waiting. His eyes found her instantly, dark and searching, as though he already knew she had heard too much. "Vivian," he murmured, drawing her aside, away from the crowd. His hand brushed her elbow lightly, guiding her into a quiet alcove lit only by the spill of golden chandeliers. She faced him, arms crossed tightly, her voice unsteady. "She hates me." Zayden's jaw tightened. "She hates losing." "She said she married him for power," Vivian whispered, half to herself. "She said she wants to see you miserable." Her eyes lifted, hazel flecked with defiance. "And you didn't deny it. You didn't deny that she still matters." His gaze flickered, the mask slipping for the first time that evening. "Rosetta will always be a scar I carry. I won't pretend otherwise." The words sliced through her. For a moment, Vivian wanted to turn, to walk away before her heart gave too much. But Zayden stepped closer, his voice softer now, stripped of the cold armor he wore. "But tonight, with you?" His breath caught, his eyes locked onto hers, vulnerable in a way she had never imagined he could be. "For the first time, I wonder if I can let her go." Vivian's lips parted, her breath shallow. She wanted to believe him, but fear surged just as strongly. This was supposed to be an arrangement, a business deal. And yet the air between them hummed with something raw, undeniable. "You shouldn't say things like that," she whispered, her voice trembling. "Why?" His hand lifted, hovering as though afraid to touch, before finally brushing against hers where it rested against her gown. The contact was electric, a simple touch that burned more deeply than a kiss. "Because..." She faltered, her body betraying her resolve. Because this isn't real. Then why does it feel real? He countered, his voice low, urgent. Her heart pounded. She tried to step back, but his hand caught hers, anchoring her. The world seemed to blur. The laughter in the hall, the music, the clinking of glasses, all of it fading until there was only him. And then, as though pulled by gravity itself, he leaned in. His lips brushed hers, hesitant at first, almost testing. Vivian froze, her breath stolen, before heat surged through her chest, and she leaned in without meaning to, answering him. The kiss was not staged, not calculated. It was desperate, searching, blurring the line between their roles and their truths. His hand rose to her jaw, gentle, reverent, while hers trembled against his chest. When they broke apart, both were breathless, their eyes wide with the shock of what they had just done. Vivian's hand shot to her lips, her voice barely audible. That wasn't part of the deal. No, Zayden admitted, his voice rough, his eyes unguarded. It wasn't. For a long moment they stood in silence, hearts racing, the reality of their arrangement cracking at the edges. The world outside the alcove pressed close, guests still gossiping, Rosetta still watching, Vincent still plotting. But inside, something irreversible had shifted. Vivian could no longer tell where the lie ended and the truth began, and neither could he. Do you think Vivian should trust Zayden's feelings or guard her heart because it started as just a deal? But tonight, with you. His breath caught, his eyes locked onto hers, vulnerable in a way she had never imagined he could be. For the first time, I wonder if I can let her go. Vivian's lips parted, her breath shallow. She wanted to believe him, but fear surged just as strongly. This was supposed to be an arrangement, a business deal, and yet the air between them hummed with something raw, undeniable. You shouldn't say things like that, she whispered, her voice trembling. Why? His hand lifted, hovering as though afraid to touch, before finally brushing against hers where it rested against her gown. The contact was electric, a simple touch that burned more deeply than a kiss. Because, she faltered, her body betraying her resolve. Because this isn't real. Then why does it feel real? He countered, his voice low, urgent. Her heart pounded. She tried to step back, but his hand caught hers, anchoring her. The world seemed to blur, the laughter in the hall, the music, the clinking of glasses, all of it fading until there was only him. And then, as though pulled by gravity itself, he leaned in. His lips brushed hers, hesitant at first, almost testing. Vivian froze, her breath stolen before heat surged through her chest, and she leaned in without meaning to, answering him. The kiss was not staged, not calculated. It was desperate, searching, blurring the line between their roles and their truths. His hand rose to her jaw, gentle, reverent, while hers trembled against his chest. When they broke apart, both were breathless, their eyes wide with the shock of what they had just done. Vivian's hand shot to her lips, her voice barely audible. That wasn't part of the deal. No, Zayden admitted, his voice rough, his eyes unguarded. It wasn't. For a long moment, they stood in silence, hearts racing, the reality of their arrangement cracking at the edges. The world outside the alcove pressed close, guests still gossiping, Rosetta still watching, Vincent still plotting, but inside, something irreversible had shifted. Vivian could no longer tell where the lie ended and the truth began, and neither could he. Do you think Vivian should trust Zayden's feelings or guard her heart because it started as just a deal? The air in the reception hall had grown thick with the weight of too many glances, too many whispers pitched just low enough to sting. Vivian still felt the ghost of Zayden's kiss on her lips, a spark that had shaken her carefully guarded walls. But as she stood once more among chandeliers and gilded laughter, a new storm was rising, one she could not have prepared for. It began with the flicker of camera flashes beyond the tall glass doors. Paparazzi had been relentless all evening, but now the tempo shifted, growing fevered, frantic. Guests pulled out their phones, murmurs cascading like dominoes through the glittering crowd. A waiter slipped a folded newspaper onto a table, and within seconds it was snatched up, passed from manicured hand to manicured hand. Vivian didn't need to see it to know. Her chest tightened as the tide of whispers swelled. Gold digger, bought and paid for. Nobody. Then one of the glossy tabloids was thrust into view, its headline screaming in bold letters above a photo of her and Zayden. Sterling's new flame? Art gallery girl? Or just another gold digger? The image was cruelly angled. Vivian glancing down while Zayden's hand rested on hers, making her look meek, submissive. Another photo showed her entering the cathedral, eyes wide as though overwhelmed, captured mid-blink so she appeared out of her depth. Together, the images painted her not as a partner but as a pawn. She froze, her breath catching. Every insecurity she'd ever swallowed clawed to the surface. Across the room, Rosetta smiled like a queen surveying a battlefield. She whispered something into Vincent's ear and he smirked, leaning into the nearest reporter who scribbled furiously. Her plan was unfolding with precision. Vivian could see it in the gleam of her eyes. Zayden caught sight of the headlines, his jaw tightening, the ice in his expression cutting through the noise. He moved swiftly, his hand firm on Vivian's arm as he pulled her closer. "Ignore it," he said, low and sharp. "They're vultures. You are not their feast." But the words, meant to protect, pierced instead. Because hadn't that been exactly what she was? A role, a shield, a distraction to wave before Rosetta and the world. The tabloids hadn't created that truth. They had simply weaponized it. Vivian pulled back, her voice cracking despite her attempt at composure. This was always how it was going to be, wasn't it? I was never anything more than your pawn. His eyes darkened, a flicker of desperation breaking through his control. "No, Vivian, you don't understand." But she did. Or at least she thought she did. The deal had been clear. She had stepped willingly into this charade. And now, with every whisper slicing her open, she realized how foolish she had been to hope it might be more. Rosetta's laughter floated across the room, soft and venomous, carrying farther than it should have. Vivian's face burned, shame crawling up her neck until it choked her. She could not stand here, center stage in a play she had never agreed to star in. "I can't do this," she whispered, her voice trembling as she wrenched free of Zayden's grip. "Vivian!" His hand reached for her again, but she stepped back, shaking her head, her vision blurring with hot tears she refused to let fall here, not in front of them, not in front of Rosetta. "I won't be their spectacle. I won't be yours." And before he could stop her, she turned and fled. Past the marble pillars, past the gawking faces and the clicking cameras, out into the cold night air that stung her skin and stole her breath. Her heels struck the pavement, uneven against the cobblestones. But she didn't care. The city loomed around her, alive and merciless, and she welcomed the anonymity of its darkness. At least here, no one knew her name. Inside, Zayden stood rooted where she had left him, the echo of her words reverberating through the hollows of his chest. Around him, whispers swelled louder, sharper, a chorus of judgment he had once been impervious to. But now, stripped of Vivian's steady fire, they cut deeper than any rival ever had. For the first time in years, he felt exposed. Not because of Rosetta's games, not because of the headlines, but because he had let someone in. Because he had kissed her, not as a performance, but as a man stripped bare of his armor. And she had run from him. His gaze swept the hall, landing on Rosetta. She raised her glass in mocking salute, her smile victorious. He should have felt rage, the familiar burn of battle. Instead, he felt hollow. Hollow and desperate, as if he had just watched the only real connection he had touched in years slip through his fingers. The empire he had built, the walls he had fortified, meant nothing if Vivian Karl saw him as nothing more than a man who used her. And maybe she was right. Vivian wandered for blocks, the hem of her gown brushing grime as she moved blindly through streets lit by harsh neon. She heard the echoes of laughter still, the cruel words printed in bold. Gold digger. Pawn. She wanted to scream that they were wrong, that she was more. But in her heart, doubt whispered that they were right. At a small cafe still open past midnight, she ducked inside, sliding into a booth with shaking hands. Her reflection in the glass window showed a woman she barely recognized, eyes too bright with unshed tears, lips still tingling from a kiss that had felt too much like truth. She pressed her palms flat against the table. "Never again," she whispered to herself. "I won't let anyone make me feel small again." But the lie in those words cut deeper than the tabloids had, because for all her vows, her heart had already betrayed her. In the cathedral hall, Zayden lingered long after the last guests trickled out, the headlines still flashing across abandoned newspapers. For once, he didn't care about his pride, his reputation, or even the game Rosetta thought she had won. He cared only that Vivian had looked at him with broken eyes, that she had fled from him as though he were no different from the world that had mocked her. He sank into a chair, bourbon untouched at his side, the silence of the vast room pressing in. His world had always been about control, winning, protecting, never exposing weakness. But tonight, he had lost the only thing that mattered. And for the first time, Zayden Sterling, the untouchable king of Wall Street, felt utterly powerless. Vivian hadn't realized how far she'd walked until her heels ached, and the glitter of the cathedral felt like a distant fever dream. She sat slumped in a cafe booth, her emerald gown a striking, misplaced jewel in the dim, ordinary light. Her reflection in the window stared back at her with eyes too wide, too tired, too broken. For the first time that night, she allowed the tears to fall. Not loud, racking sobs, just silent streams, slipping hot down her cheeks, catching on her lip. She hated herself for it. Hated the tabloids, the whispers, Rosetta's poisonous smile. But most of all, she hated how much Zayden's kiss still lived in her chest, a cruel reminder of how easily she had let herself hope. Her phone buzzed in her clutch. With shaking hands, she pulled it out and pressed a familiar name. "Viv?" Corinna's voice came through instantly, warm but alert. "I need you," Vivian whispered, her voice breaking. "Please. I'm at a cafe on 5th and Meadow. I can't be alone right now." "I'm on my way." The bell above the cafe door chimed minutes later. Vivian didn't look up at first, not until a familiar voice pierced the fog. "Vivian." Corinna slid into the booth opposite her, her eyes soft but sharp, the way only a friend's could be. She didn't reach for her hand immediately, didn't rush into pity. Instead, she let silence sit between them until Vivian finally whispered, "They made a fool of me." "What happened?" Corinna asked, worry knitting her brow. Vivian's throat tightened. "The tabloids took pictures, made me look like some gold digger clinging to Zayden's arm. And I know it was Rosetta the bride, Zayden's ex. She planned it. She wanted me humiliated, and it worked. I ran before they could laugh in my face." Corinna's jaw clenched, her fury sparking. But her voice, when she spoke, was steady. "No, they tried to. But do you want to know what I saw tonight before you left for the wedding?" Vivian lifted her gaze reluctantly, her lashes wet. "I saw a woman who would walk into that hall and own it," Corinna continued. "Not because of the gown, not because of Zayden Sterling's name, because of you, your fire, your wit. Do you think anyone will remember the color of Rosetta's bouquet tomorrow? No. They'll remember the girl who was hidden but came out for the first time with fire." Vivian's lips parted, disbelief warring with the fragile hope Corinna had lit. "You lit up that room," Corinna pressed, leaning closer. "Not because of Zayden's money, not because of his pride, but because you belong anywhere your feet choose to stand. They only hate you because they see it too. The words sank in, slow, like balm over raw skin. Vivian wanted to argue, to retreat into her fear, but Corinna's eyes shone with truth. For the first time, Vivian wondered if maybe, just maybe, she wasn't an imposter in silk. Back at the cathedral, Zayden's world had shifted from ice to fire. He stalked through the nearly empty hall, his jaw locked, his every step sharp enough to cut stone. Rosetta lingered near the dais, her champagne glass raised like a victor's sword. Vincent stood at her side, smug and detached, the portrait of old money arrogance. Was it worth it? Zayden's voice cracked the silence, low and lethal. Rosetta's smile widened, her diamonds catching the chandelier light. Which part, darling? Marrying Vincent, or watching your little toy run out in tears? Vincent chuckled under his breath, clearly amused. Zayden's gaze snapped to him, ice hardening into steel. Careful. If you think hiding behind your family's name makes you untouchable, you're a bigger fool than I thought. Rosetta's expression flickered, just a twitch, but he caught it. She stepped forward, her perfume cloying, her tone mocking. This anger, this fire. Where was it when you had me, Zayden? You were always too proud to admit you needed me. Too proud to see that love isn't power. That's why you lost. His chest tightened, but not with longing. Not anymore. For years, he had carried the wound of Rosetta's betrayal, convincing himself that pride was armor, that if he could not have her, at least he would not appear weak. But standing here now with the bitter taste of Vivian's absence burning in his chest, he finally saw it for what it was. A trap. One he had built himself. I didn't lose you, Rosetta, he said, his voice steadier than he felt. I lost years, wasted them clinging to the ashes of something that never mattered. He stepped closer, his presence towering, his eyes burning with clarity. I was too proud to admit you broke me, but you didn't win. Because tonight I realize there's someone worth breaking for. And it isn't you. Her face paled, the diamond smile cracking, but Zayden didn't wait for her reply. He turned on his heel, his chest pounding, the weight of years finally falling from his shoulders. Vivian sat in the cafe long after Corinna had gone, the friend's words echoing in her mind. You lit up that room. She touched her lips unconsciously, remembering the kiss, the way Zayden had looked at her, not as a pawn, not as armor, but as if she were the only thing holding his world together. Her heart ached, torn between distrust and the undeniable truth. Part of her wanted to believe him. Outside, the night pressed heavy, neon lights bleeding across the wet pavement. Vivian stood at last, smoothing her gown, straightening her spine. If she walked away now, she would never know if the fire between them had been real or just another illusion. And somewhere across the city, Zayden was making the same choice. Not to save face, not to play the game, but to fight for her. The city pulsed with music and laughter, spilling from the glass walls of the after-party hall. Guests had migrated from the cathedral to this sprawling rooftop venue glittering with lights, the skyline stretching out like a jeweled crown. Champagne flowed, gossip circled, and beneath it all, the undercurrent of Rosetta's perfect performance thrummed on. Vivian lingered near the exit, her clutch clutched tightly in one hand, her gown dragging slightly as though it too shared her exhaustion. She had stayed only because it would have looked worse to vanish entirely, but the weight of 100 eyes made her skin burn. Every whisper still rang in her ears. Gold digger. Pawn. She wanted nothing more than to slip out into the night and disappear. But before she could take another step, the crowd shifted. A new energy swept through the room, sharp and commanding, like the crack of a storm. Zayden Sterling had arrived. He cut through the hall with lethal grace, his tailored suit immaculate, his eyes locked not on Rosetta, not on Vincent, not on the swarm of society's elite who reached for his attention, but on Vivian. She froze, breath caught in her chest. His gaze burned with something she had never seen so naked in him before. Desperation. "Vivian," he said when he reached her, his voice low yet carrying across the room, silencing conversations. "Don't leave." Her chest tightened. "I can't stay here, not like this." "Then let's make it what it should be." And before she could ask what he meant, he turned. In one smooth motion, Zayden stepped into the center of the glittering hall. He drew in a breath, his voice ringing out with a steel edge that cut through the music, through the whispers, through the carefully crafted facades of everyone present. "You want a headline?" he said, his gaze sweeping the crowd before landing back on her. "Here's one. Vivian Karl isn't my fake girlfriend. She isn't a pawn or a distraction or some arrangement." He paused, his jaw tightening, his heart thundering. "She's the woman who changed everything." A gasp rippled through the room, sharp and immediate. Heads turned, glasses stilled. Rosetta's face blanched, her lips parting as the weight of Zayden's words settled like a stone dropped in water, rippling outward until no corner of the room was untouched. Vivian's breath caught. Heat rushed up her neck, her chest, as every eye turned to her. But for once, she didn't feel small. Not with his gaze anchoring her. Rosetta recovered quickly, her smile slicing like a knife as she glided forward, Vincent at her side. "Touching," she drawled, her voice dripping poison. "But everyone here knows the truth, Zayden. You needed a prop, and you picked that." Her eyes darted toward Vivian with open contempt. "A gallery girl dressed in silk." Vincent chuckled, shaking his head. "It's embarrassing, Sterling. Really. Do you think parading around some nobody will erase what you've lost?" But Rosetta had chosen her moment poorly. For Vincent's hand resting at her back, squeezed too hard. His smile didn't reach his eyes, and the words he whispered next were loud enough to carry. "Careful, darling," he muttered to her, though others caught it. "Remember your place." The crowd stiffened. Murmurs rose, sharp and scandalized. Rosetta's smile faltered, panic flashing across her eyes as the mask cracked. Zayden's lip curled in disdain. "There it is, the man you married for power, treating you like a possession. That's the love story you wanted society to worship? Let them worship it, then." All eyes turned back to Rosetta and Vincent, the sheen of perfection stripped away. And for the first time, Rosetta seemed small, her diamonds dull under the unforgiving gaze of the crowd. The whispers that once cut Vivian now shifted, rolling in a new current. He chose her. He defended her. Look at him. And then Zayden turned back to Vivian. He stepped closer, his voice lowering, meant for her though the whole world leaned in to listen. "I don't care about the whispers. I don't care about them. All I care about is you. You walked into that hall tonight and reminded me what it means to feel alive. I thought pride would keep me safe, but all it did was keep me empty. Vivian, I won't let you walk away thinking you were anything less than everything." Her eyes stung, her lips trembling, her heart caught between fear and longing. She whispered, almost too quietly to hear. "Zayden?" He reached for her hand, gently, as though she were something precious, not a weapon or a shield. "Tell me you don't feel it too, and I'll let you go." The silence stretched, the city humming beyond the glass, the crowd holding its breath. But Vivian couldn't lie. Not now. Not with his touch searing into hers, with his words echoing through every corner of her soul. "I feel it," she breathed, and in the next heartbeat, his lips were on hers. The kiss was nothing like the stolen one in the alcove. This was fire meeting fire, not for show, not for survival, but for truth. His hand cupped her jaw, her fingers tangled in his lapel, the crowd erupting around them in gasps and shouts. But neither cared. Because in that moment, under the glittering lights and the shattered lies of the past, Zayden and Vivian stood not as armor and pawn, not as billionaire and outsider, but as two souls who had finally, irrevocably, found one another. Would you have had the courage to believe Zayden's public declaration, Or would you still doubt a man who once made you part of a deal? What once burned in humiliation now lingered only as a faint ache, a memory tucked away in the folds of who I used to be. The whispers, the tabloids, the headlines that once painted me a gold digger, they had lost their teeth. Because tonight, I stood inside my gallery, and every wall gleamed with light and color that came from me. The scent of fresh paint still clung faintly to the air, mixing with the sharp tang of wine glasses carried by guests weaving between canvases. My laughter mingled with theirs, low and real, because for the first time in too long, I wasn't surviving. I was creating. Across the room, I caught sight of him. Zayden didn't dominate the space the way he had at the cathedral. He wasn't the storm in the room. He leaned casually against a column, his hands tucked into his pockets, his suit tailored but understated. His gaze wasn't on the crowd, wasn't on the critics, wasn't even on the pieces lining the walls. It was on me. Our eyes met, and my chest swelled with something both fragile and fierce. Weeks ago, I had thought I'd lost myself in him, that I was just a pawn in his endless game of power. But what grew between us after that night wasn't born of deals or arrangements. It was born of choices, mine, his, ours. He had shown up at every late-night planning session, bringing takeout when I forgot to eat, offering sharp observations about placement and lighting, but never once trying to take over, never once trying to save me. He had learned to stand beside me, quietly, and that had been the greatest gift of all. I walked toward him now, the soft click of my heels echoing, my dress swaying against my legs. "You don't have to linger in the shadows, you know," I teased, coming to a stop in front of him. His lips curved, the faintest ghost of a smile. "I like the view from here." Heat rose to my cheeks, but I held his gaze. "The critics are impressed," I said. "Even the ones who came to sharpen their knives." "They should be," he said simply. "They're looking at someone who rebuilt herself out of fire." My throat tightened. The old me would have deflected, would have laughed it off, but not tonight. Tonight, I let myself believe him. "And what about you?" I asked softly. "The man who had everything, except this." His jaw shifted, his eyes glinting. "I had pride," he admitted. "Pride and power and the illusion of control. But none of it ever touched me. Not really." His gaze dropped, softened, then lifted again. "You did. You still do." The hum of the room faded, the clinking glasses and murmured voices falling away until it felt like we were alone again, just as we had been in that first reckless kiss. I reached for his hand, and this time there was no hesitation, no performance. My fingers threaded with his, and his grip tightened as though it had been waiting all along. Across the gallery, someone whispered Rosetta's name. Something about her latest scandal. Another headline that flickered and died as quickly as it was spoken. She was already fading, the star that burned too bright and collapsed under its own weight. She had no place in our story anymore. I leaned into Zayden's shoulder, the press of his body steady, grounding. For so long he had been untouchable, polished, untamed, armored in his own walls. But standing here, hand in hand, I knew he wasn't untouchable anymore. Because I had touched him, and he had let me. The night wound down with warm laughter and lingering goodbyes. Guests filtered out, leaving behind the faint echo of approval, the sweet taste of victory. When the last critic's footsteps faded, I turned to Zayden, my gallery empty except for us. "This doesn't feel fake anymore," I whispered. He stepped closer, brushing a strand of hair from my cheek, his touch reverent. "That's because it never was." And when he kissed me, slow and unhurried, it wasn't for show. It wasn't for survival. And when he kissed me, slow and unhurried, it wasn't for show. It wasn't for survival. It was because we had finally found our way home, together. "Do you believe love that starts as fake can ever become real?"